Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live on a Victory Tuesday, October the 1st. Stoney, it is officially spooky month, but I am your host, JT Ruhnke, producer and writer, or host and writer here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me on X at JT_Ruhnke. That was a little slip of the tongue here, but once again, as always, joined here by the wonderful Stoney Keeley at Stoney Keeley on Twitter. He is the editor-in-chief of Sobros Network, 1/3 of football and other F words, and fellow writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are we doing today? You know, not a victory Monday. The Titans have yet to have a victory Monday, but they're one of the few teams that can say they've had a victory Tuesday. How are you doing?
Feeling pretty good, man. I think this is something we've talked about on this show this season so far. The Titans just need a win. Now, I don't want to be Debbie Downer on today's show, but I think the Dolphins were pretty banged up. There are a lot of things that were working in the Titans' favor last night, but it's proof of concept regardless. This team gets out of the funk they were in. 30 points. It's a big night. Mason Rudolph's in. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more dramatic from a storyline standpoint. The football on the field was probably enough to make people bang their head against the wall, but we'll get into all that, JT. For now, the vibes are high. We are doing good. We are doing good.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right off the top there. The drought is over. We came into Friday's show talking about how the Titans would go officially over 1,000 days without scoring 30 points in a game. Last time they did it against the Miami Dolphins on January 2nd, 2022. Well, guess what? On Monday Night Football, they get over that hump, and the drought is over as the Titans win 31-12. And like you said, it was not a pretty effort. You know, I feel like that game could really looks like the new movie that's coming out, Megalopolis. You know, where the spectacle and the storyline around it. That it's peak cinema there, but the actual product, from what I've heard, is just absolutely trash. And so, yeah, that's a pretty good summation of the Titans game here. But like you said, a win is a win nonetheless here. If you are joining us live on this wonderful episode of the Hot Read Podcast here on this Tuesday, and you're watching us over on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube channel and join the comment section, like quarterback coach Sean McAvoy, who says, I heard when the Titans win, Stoney actually plays that guitar.
Oh, man.
I feel like I didn't realize that you played the guitar, but now maybe you're going to have to get on the podcast here and maybe look at
all the dust on this thing. Look at all the dust on this thing. I mean, listen, I keep saying I'm going to get this thing restrung because the strings are literally rusty right now. Like if I try to play something, I'll slice my fingers open.
Oh, wow.
And I keep looking at it. I'm like, I need to get that thing restrung. I don't know if we can pick up how out of tune it is. Let's try here. This is good podcasting.
Oh,
Ooh.
Brother. I didn't hear that very well, but my trained musical ears told me that's
not good.
That's not good there. But nonetheless, John Gall here in the comments saying, JT, how are you going to tweet join us? And you're not even here yet. Well, quit your whining. We're here now.
We're here.
Yeah. And I think Ed brings up a really interesting point here. He says, JT, are you multitasking and watching the Mets while doing the show? Yeah, for reference, the New York Mets kind of almost gave me a heart attack yesterday in what was the craziest baseball game I've probably ever watched with my own two eyes. And they start their first game of the postseason at 4:30. So who knows, Stoney? Maybe if I don't have that much analysis today, it's because I'm trying to speed run any percent a Hot Read podcast. Who knows? But,
well, listen, if you gotta bail at 4:30, I can talk to these fine people for 30 more minutes. You know, I can.
Yeah, I feel like you could. That might be a good thing. It might be a bad thing because you'll go on a 45-minute rant about Daniel Brunskill getting 11 snaps, reporting as eligible there. Yeah. However, like I said, I'm once again putting myself to the torture of watching the Mets later on tonight. And that's why we have our lovely sponsor, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages, to get me through the game. I went over there last week and got all stocked up for the Mets playoff run here. If you know 440 Sports, you definitely know them. If not, we are happy to introduce you. Thank you once again to Sinkers, who sponsors this lovely show and makes this content free for you, as always. But more on them later, and we can start to dive into what was, even though the second half of this game had a lot of scoring, I don't think, and it's a definitive win for the Titans. There was nothing great about this game. I think you can still chalk it up to being a gross, ugly game. And like you said, a lot of it had to do with this Miami Dolphins team just being a rough product across the board there, right? You had, in terms of injuries in this game on the defensive side of the ball for them, no Kendall Fuller. Phillips leaves in the middle of the game with a knee injury. Jordan Poyer also leaves in the middle of the game. David Long Jr., former Titan, also did not play in this game. So that defense, you really were looking at maybe the Miami Dolphins practice squad kind of defense out there. But, and then on the offensive side of the ball, Teron Armstead was out for them. So that was the hindrance there on the offensive side, not to mention their third string quarterback in Tyler Huntley, who plays his first game with the Miami Dolphins. And outside of a couple plays that could have been kind of fire starters for the Miami Dolphins offense in terms of the deep balls to Tyreek Hill, which friend of the show and former host Easton Freeze kind of charted those out and said there was almost 160 Tyreek Hill yards and 14 Tyreek Hill points the Titans avoided courtesy of Snoop Huntley overthrows or underthrows. The Titans kind of just did what they needed to do in this game and took care of business.
Absolutely, JT. Is a lot like my sex life. It ain't always pretty, but we're going to get the job done. We're going to get there together. And that's what it was last night. It wasn't pretty. It was an ugly brand of football. But the things that the Titans did well in this matchup that I wasn't really counting on, because I thought the Dolphins were going to win this game because I liked Mike McDaniel's scheme. I thought they'd be able to run the ball, attack the edges. And really, Denard Wilson, hats off to him, had a great game plan for how to attack that style. It felt like Quandre Diggs, Jarvis Brownlee Jr., Kenneth Murray were constantly at the edge, ready for whoever the ball carrier was going to be. They met him out there and they made the tackle. They talked about having to be a little more physical, focus on tackling, that sort of deal. And I think they were the more physical team last night. They punched the Dolphins in the mouth and they just couldn't get going anything with the run game. I also thought that the Miami Dolphins, even with Teron Armstead, I don't think he's been playing his best football this season. And I thought there were some vulnerabilities at the tackle spots on Miami's offensive line, but I didn't necessarily think that the Titans were built to attack that, right? We haven't seen much from the edge positions this season so far, and it didn't inspire a whole lot of confidence. Also, we've been on this show talking about 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, run the ball. You've got an offensive line that's built for it. You have a quarterback that's making a ton of mistakes. Get into a rhythm in the run game. But Brian Callahan, to this point, hasn't really leaned into the success that they've had with the run game. So I kind of thought this would be more square peg, round hole, forcing things in. They wouldn't be able to get any pressure from the edge. Miami was going to attack the boundary. They were going to have success, and it was going to be one of those death by a million paper cut, boring-ass games. It wasn't the case at all. Arden Key showed up for the first time this season, had a great game last night. They were attacking the edges. They had bodies in space, completely different style of defense than we've seen so far. It wasn't as much aggressive blitzing. There was a lot of just rush for and drop everybody else into space to play with the Dolphins, because the offense predicated on space, getting guys out there and relying on their speed. Hats off to Denard Wilson for making that adjustment, because it completely worked, wholly worked. And then Brian Callahan, props to him for leaning into the run game in the second half of this game when they just mowed Miami's run defense down. 2 things that I didn't really count on happening in this game: the pressure at the edge, the play at the perimeter, that sort of thing, and the coaching staff leaning into what was working instead of just trying to force the issue with their scheme. Hats off to those guys. Great performance.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I mean, the biggest thing we talked about on Friday's show was Denard Wilson trying to make those adjustments and putting his players in the right spot to succeed. And it really felt like that was the case last night, putting those players in better positions to set the edge and make those plays. And it's those little adjustments last night where you start to see some impact plays from guys you weren't really seeing yet. Like you said, Arden Key with a very big night. It was probably one of the guys on this team that I think needed to step up in the biggest way possible. He's in there with Quandre Diggs setting the edge on Tyreek Hill on a 4th and 1 and makes the play, or at least starts the play for the Titans, and Quandre Diggs is able to finish it. But those guys I think were some guys who I think were able to step up in this game, despite the fact that they did have some speed on the opposite side and were able to beat you in weeks prior. However, Denard Wilson, props to him for being able to, see that and adjust in this game. And of course, there's maybe someone that we haven't really talked about that we may talk about a little bit later, as Shrike is alluding to in the comments here. He says, oh, something was great, and he weighs over 350 pounds, if not just around there. But the defense, like you said, was very, very good. However, like we saw in this game, it still just feels a little bit empty in the fact that even though this defense can kind of box a speed-like offense, box them in and just make everything not work, you're still not seeing a whole lot of results in terms of the turnover department. And I think that's something where I think it's still, as much as they do get the kind of monkey off their back in this game and get their first turnover, you look at that play and you realize that, the Titans are still not doing that much to pressure even the worst of quarterbacks like Tyler Huntley last night into making plays where you see them have the chance to get a turnover. Obviously, that backwards pass goes through Tyreek Hill's hands, and Hill, who doesn't even make an attempt on the ball, just kind of leaves it there for the Titans to scoop up and not run all the way back, but it does mean they get the turnover. And so while the Titans snap their 12-quarter streak of without a turnover, it still doesn't feel like they did much to generate the pressure needed to make those turnovers.
Yeah, and I think the concerning thing is, ultimately, I think what we'll get at here is that, yes, it feels good to have had this victory. It feels good to have gotten the 30-point streak, to get that monkey off the back, to get a turnover in this game. But I think within the context of, okay, well, they're still not really getting to Snoop Huntley to make the big mistake. Now, I think part of that is Mike McDaniel having a very conservative game plan with that. But I also think that there's still plenty to prove. And that's why I ultimately land on, yes, it's good to get this victory. Obviously, huge sigh of relief. I'm not going to tell anybody not to celebrate on this fine Victory Tuesday, but I think there are still issues you can point to and say, okay, well, maybe we can have a little bit better play here from the defense.
Yeah.
The big takeaway again is for me that you've seen now proof that the coaching staff is willing to lean into what works, and they're not going to just force the issue no matter the opponent. I think that's the big thing for me, is like, that's a step forward from this coaching staff based off of what we saw in Green Bay.
Yeah, I think it was a night and day difference in terms of the units this week. And that's where we get kind of into our conversation with the offense, which, outside of a very important part, was still also just predicated on maybe two guys on the offense as a whole. But before we get into that, have to once again shout out our wonderful and amazing sponsors, Sinkers Beverages, who have been serving the East Nashville community for over 4 or close to 4 decades. I believe their 40th anniversary is coming up here. They are a 3-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, voted on by you guys. If you're like me and want to go over there and start making that your regular spot to get all of your beer, spirit, and wine necessities, like myself and like so many in the community here, you got to join their in crowd, which is their special list or in their special group for special benefits, allocations, and events. Also got to give them a follow on social media everywhere at Sinkers Bev. And then if you're like me and you need a quick fix because Lord knows that you may be watching some absolutely heart palpitation worthy baseball tonight, search them up on Uber Eats, Sinkers on Uber Eats, and have the booze delivered to your house. Remember, they drive so you can drink responsibly, I might add. And then got to give a special shout out to Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, who have been serving that local community for over 50 years. All right, Stoney, we can move to the offensive side of the ball here in this discussion on a Victory Tuesday, and have to kind of address the elephant in the room that is Mason Rudolph coming in to relief of a injured Will Levis. Obviously, Levis starts the game on what was really it's not going to be talked about a lot, but man, was that opening drive some of the grossest and most frustrating football I've watched in a heck of a long time there. 2 offensive false start penalties by Peter Skoronski and JC Latham to start the game. And that drive should have gone 3 and out if it wasn't for a roughing the passer call on Will Levis at the start of the game. Obviously, the Titans get new life, and Will Levis starts the game 2 for 2. Phil, the Will Levis moment of the week happens. I think we should get a sponsor for that and just have the Will Levis moment of the week is sponsored by so-and-so. But Will Levis throws another pick, tying Anthony Richardson for the league lead in 6 interceptions there. And so with Will Levis kind of throwing this pick again in what was I wouldn't say it's a boneheaded play, but it brings concern to me, because I think you realize that on that play, Will Levis was only looking in the direction of DeAndre Hopkins there. And so I think it's a really interesting conversation because, as I pointed out last night, this is the second time in two weeks that we've seen Will Levis get bested by the defense on a designed look where he is throwing to his first read. And Nick Holtz continues in his press availability with the coordinators on Thursdays to say that this is a progression-based offense. And I said last night, for a progression-based offense, Will Levis sure likes to pull the trigger on that first read and try to fit it into a hole he knows he should not be fitting it into. And so I wonder, as much as it is Will Levis's fault there, how concerning is it that a lot of these plays where Will Levis is going to that first read and defenses are able to pick up on it so easily? How big of a concern is that for Will, but also the play calling of Brian Callahan?
Well, I think it's a massive concern. It's something that you have to keep in mind if you're Brian Callahan and you are calling the plays. It's putting your quarterback in a position to do something incredibly risky because that's probably the decision that he's going to make. Look, defenses know this. Defenses know that he's going to do this. I can't recall who it was a couple of weeks ago that made the comments about, he's good, but we kind of know what he is when you get pressure on him. It's the same thing with the reads. Like you can tell when he's fixating on something, when he doesn't come off the read, and it's an advantage for the defense. And I think that absolutely is something that can potentially hamstring your play calling ability. How can you get into a rhythm? How can you really open up the playbook when this is your main concern? And part of his benching, I know he was warming up over on the sidelines and maybe he could have come back into the game. Brian Callahan said in his presser late last night that Will came to him and said, I just don't think I can do it. So he appreciated the honesty, but there is part of me that wonders, what if this was a case where you're protecting the guy from himself, not just because he's hurt, but because you just don't want him to go out there. Now he's weakened and he's just going to keep doing the same stuff. So maybe you are protecting him from himself in a way. But I do think that if if this isn't something that is addressed, if we keep seeing it as we have, by the way, this isn't some new thing, new development in Will Levis's season. It's been there all 4 games. If it is something that keeps happening, it's absolutely something that this offensive coordinator and this head coach, the play caller, has to take into account with every play that he calls.
Yeah, I agree there with you on a lot of what you said. And there, I feel like at the end of the day, the reason why Will Levis did not enter back into that game was health related. However, it still feels like deep down that there was a little part that maybe they used the injury as a shadow benching for him in this game specifically. Now, whether that is true or not, I don't think we'll ever know. I still think that whether Will Levis went back into that game or not, the Titans realized how absolutely weakened and kind of destroyed their opponent was coming into this game. And we're going to be able to do what they did last night anyways. But still, Will Levis goes back out on the second drive and, he decides that it's Will Levis time once again and tries to make the diving play, which does leave him on the sideline for the rest of the game as he falls on his shoulder trying to make it to the first down marker, in which he does not return to that game. And so that means it is Mason Rudolph's turn to enter the game, and to probably a lot of fans cheering and their excitement. Sure. Mason Rudolph enters the game and doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. And I think that's where we get to here with Mason Rudolph. Really, this game comes down to Mason Rudolph, credit to him, was able to manage the heck out of that game the rest of the way, only having to throw, I believe, he only threw, 12 passes in this game.
Just one in the second half.
Completed 1 out of 3 in the second half.
Yeah.
Threw for 76 some odd yards there, and manages the game effectively to where the running game, which still was not even that, even though they had 40 carries on the day, was not really that effective. Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears less than 3 yards a clip on their runs. They were just able to control the clock for the rest of the game after the second quarter began. And so when I saw Mason Rudolph last night in this game, I wasn't impressed with a lot of what Rudolph did. It felt like if it was any other team but this broken Miami Dolphins defense, we would have seen this game probably not go the way of the Titans. And what I think Mason Rudolph can bring you to this game, and I think a lot of people pointed it out last night, is he's going to bring you the opportunity not to turn the ball over as much as Will Levis. He's more secure in that he's not going to throw the ball away. He's going to keep the ball in your hands until you probably have to punt it, because Mason Rudolph can manage a game for you, but he doesn't bring that he's a game manager who offers no threat downfield. And if you want to look to one play in this game, you can look at the end of the half play where Tyler Boyd completes that 25-yard pass. But as Brian, and if you want to say that was Mason Rudolph, and that's what Mason Rudolph can bring you, well, Brian Callahan in his press conference today talked a lot about how that is a design play they've been working on with all their quarterbacks since the start of training camp. And it's not something that Mason Rudolph did specifically. It was more of a designed play that really worked to end that half. And it's one that Brian Callahan recalled all the way from 2019, where Tyler Boyd did the same exact thing against the Miami Dolphins. And so when I look at the Mason Rudolph game as a whole, and I look at their opponents coming up, maybe not Indianapolis, but if I'm putting Mason Rudolph in the shoes of going up against one of those teams like the Buffalo Bills they have to play in week 7, or the Detroit Lions in week 8, you're not going to be able to do what you did against the Miami Dolphins last night against those teams. And so that's why I believe, for one, that Will Levis is still the starting quarterback of this team. And that's why Brian Callahan also believes and is standing by his quarterback one. Stoney, your thoughts on Mason Rudolph last night?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think Mason Rudolph is awesome as a backup quarterback. Like what he did last night is exactly what you want your backup quarterback to come into a game and do. And I thought, he looked all right as a passer. He was managing the offense, didn't do anything drastically dumb. Like this is backup quarterback 101. Everything about the guy. I barely noticed he was out there. I was watching him run the ball. I was watching the offensive line. I'm just like, yeah, Mason Rudolph is just there, and that's perfectly fine. That is what you want from your backup quarterback. It's great, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball like that. And then, like you alluded to, they had a few big runs in the game that negated an awful lot of losses, stops behind the line of scrimmage, that sort of thing as well. It felt like the conditions were perfect for the run game to click the way that we saw it last night. If they get into a game where they need to get out there and sling it around the yard, I just don't know what Mason Rudolph's upside really is. I think he's perfectly cast as the backup. It's where he should stay. That's what they paid him to do. I maybe you say he gives this team a higher floor just because he's not making the mistakes, but I don't think there's any throw that he made last night that Will Levis can't make. To me, I didn't see the stark contrast in his passing the ball compared to Will Levis. I think that the big difference was just seeing him not commit the big mistake, which I think Ramon Foster had an awesome take about that, saying that Mason Rudolph doesn't really move in the pocket that well. Like he's kind of a statue. He's not a mobile guy. And as an offensive lineman, it helps you to know your guy's not going to move around. So what do we talk about with Will Levis? Drifting into sacks, drifting out of the pocket, not stepping up in the pocket, just his overall pocket awareness. You don't have to worry about that with Mason Rudolph because he ain't going nowhere when he drops back. So I do think that's an added bonus, but what do you want this season to be? I mean, do you really want to evaluate and see if Will Levis can get closer and closer to what his talent and potential suggests he can be? Do you want to get that answer, or do you want to get like 5 or 6 wins and ultimately still have the same questions at the end of the season? I think that's the question you're asking here. And I go with Levis. I think he's still the guy until you have your definitive answer on him. And when you get to that point, if you want to play Rudolph, fine. But to me, that's still what the move would signify is, hey, if Mason Rudolph is the starting quarterback, it means you've thrown in the flag, you've thrown in the towel on Will Levis.
And that is the question that Paul Kaharski, also part of the 440 podcast network in front of the show here, asked Brian Callahan today. And Brian Callahan had very much a very similar answer to what you just said right there, Stoney. From Paul Kaharski, here's what Brian Callahan had to say on Will Levis. If, what is the objective of Will Levis this season?
And I appreciate Mason's professionalism. I appreciate how prepared he was and ready to go into the game. But Will is our starting quarterback, and I said it last night, and I'll reiterate it again, that when he's healthy, he's starting. And hopefully he's healthy for Indy, and we're ready to roll, and he's the starting quarterback, because it's hard to play quarterback in the NFL, as everybody knows. There does take some development. Guys make young player mistakes. You see it all across the league right now, and we're going to find out everything about Will that we can. And he's going to continue to grow and get better and play better. He needs to play better for us. And at the end of the day, I believe that he will. And that's where I'm at with that whole thing. There's no controversy. There's no second guessing. That's what's happening. So that's probably as clear as I can state it.
A pretty definitive answer there from the head coach. And I do, with using that video straight from Paul Kaharski, I feel like it's only right that I also join him on clowning Terry McCormick for trying to interrupt Brian Callahan in that clip in what Chef Ran also calls the question of the year. So hopefully that gets me good wishes and the ability to use that clip there. But everything he said is true. I mean, the thinking behind playing Mason Rudolph, just going down that track, that path of thought there, playing Mason Rudolph in this game, and we do have I guess a number one, maybe Mason Rudolph's number one fan here in the chat today. Michael Clyburn saying Mason Rudolph played mistake-free football. Leave him as the starter. That's what you're going to get with Mason Rudolph the rest of the season. You're going to get a lot of mistake-free football, but then goes on to say better deep ball, quick release, mistake-free, and a leader. I don't know I don't know what kind of Steelers tape you're watching from last year, but like as much as Mason Rudolph was able to take that team to a 500 record last season, he doesn't offer the upside of what Will Levis could be at his best. And I think that's what Brian Callahan wants as the head coach of his team here. He wants the quarterback who is going to achieve the highest level of quarterback play that you can get for your team. Mason Rudolph offers a nice stopgap, but Will Levis, in the flashes that he's shown, offers you something so much more than Mason Rudolph for this team. In both the what he brings as a threat to the defense and what they have to game plan for, and also just with the I guess personnel that you already have on your team.
And I would say still, are we talking about the same Steelers that watch this guy engineer a playoff run down the stretch for them and still said, no, we want the corpse of Russell Wilson and we want busted ass reclamation project Justin Fields in our quarterback room instead? Are these the same Steelers we're talking about here? Because I mean, listen, like I don't want this podcast to turn into a shit fest all over Mason Rudolph, because I like that he did his job.
I think like Mason Rudolph is a good backup.
And that's what I was about to say. He's the backup quarterback. He is one of the best backup quarterbacks in the entire NFL, but he doesn't have the ceiling, the physical tools that Will Levis has. And that's still what we're trying to tap into here. Right. And we see the flashes of that still amidst all of the poor decisions. I'm not trying to defend Will Levis. I'm just saying that I can't fathom watching that game last night and thinking, you know what? Yeah, that's what we need at quarterback. That's going to get you maybe 5 or 6 wins. You're going to beat the Jags twice and maybe the Colts once, and then you're going to beat.
I like the Jags dick there. That's a good one.
I got you, man. But you know what I'm saying? Like there's a ceiling. There's a ceiling with both of these guys. And if you take all of the mistakes away and you just look at the talent, the potential, Levis is clearly higher ceiling. And I think that's what they're clinging on to, is like, we can still get to that point.
Yeah. And I like you said right there, I don't want this to be all down on Mason Rudolph. I think Mason Rudolph is a guy who is exceptional at the backup quarterback position in stopping that gap and being able to go with a game plan. And Jason in the comments here says it perfectly, as he says, Rudolph can read a defense, and that might be his one talent. Levis needs the experience if he's ever going to be able to do that same thing. He might. I do want to give Mason Rudolph his flowers. We saw a lot more of reading the defense at the line of scrimmage, getting the ball off faster than Will Levis did. But that's because Mason Rudolph, has been in the league now for 6-7 years. I mean, Will Levis has not even played a whole season. And I know that that is some of the things that coming into the draft with Will Levis were some of the concerns there. But with Brian Callahan, you'd be doing Will Levis a disservice not to try to help him develop into being able to do the same things that Mason Rudolph can do. And so I think QB coach McAvoy in the comments here, Sean McAvoy, who I will default to on a lot of these things, who knows a whole heck of a lot more than me.
We should take his word for it.
Says it best here. And he says, quarterback development requires 2 things: having a plan and the necessary time to execute that plan. If there's confidence in the plan, you give Levis the time to develop. If there's no plan, you go to a new quarterback. And I think that says it best, because Brian Callahan has been around a lot of good quarterbacks in his time. And that's where I think we get into the discussion that this plan right now for Will Levis to continue developing. And we've seen some development from him. I know Paul Koharski on a football show right before this talked about how we've seen this gradual progression from boneheaded plays to just stupid mistakes. And that is, for better or for worse, that is progress. And so maybe you'll see down the road here in against a Colts team who is probably, reeling as much as the Miami Dolphins are maybe this upcoming in week 6, especially against them, but then against some better competition in the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions, you might start to see Will Levis honing some of that stuff in and maybe seeing the best of Will Levis yet to come in those games. And so I think that brings up the question here for you, Stoney. Comes back to that question. How long do you think that the entire season is that plan and the necessary time? Or do you think that Brian Callahan might be just like a Dave Canales and might pull the plug around week 10 if we don't see things start to continue to develop?
I think it's certainly possible. I think that I would ride it out with Will Levis. And to be clear, I probably sound like I'm defending a lot of Will's mistakes this season so far. And I ultimately, I don't know where my faith levels are at right now in seeing the plan to fruition, seeing its completion, the faith that he will live up to his potential. I don't know where I'm at with that right now, because it looks to me like he's trending in the opposite direction right now. But I will say that if you think like you can go on a run with Mason Rudolph and that you can do some real damage in the playoffs, and you see that you're seeing the same issues with Will Levis, a month and a half down the road, maybe you make the decision. But I kind of feel like this team understands where it's at right now. I don't think the expectations are a deep January run. And so I think they'll want to get as much evaluation tape in on Levis as they can. And look, the added bonus of this, I'm not saying that they're thinking this inside the building, but the added bonus is if he's not the guy, if you get your answer, if he doesn't get any better, well, then you just let the thing bottom out so that you have the capital to invest in the position moving forward. And even if that's not this year's quarterback class, which I'm interested in. I think there are some guys that could turn into something. Don't think it's the greatest. I don't think it's like last year's quarterback class, but if you like your guy, if you have your guy, you can go get him with a higher draft pick. Or if it's not the guy, you might be able to package some things around to pick up some more picks in 2026 and ride it out for another year. It depends on what the expectations were whenever Brian Callahan accepted this job, and he sat down with ownership, and he sat down with Rand Carthon and Chad Brinker and the whole brain trust, and they got together and they said, we've got a 5-year timeline, or do we have a 1-year timeline? And based on those conversations is what I would assume they're setting the plan off of. So if you have a little more patience, maybe you can just ride it out and focus on building the roster around the quarterback position, and you play Will Levis the rest of the way and just see what happens. If the expectations are we got to get to winning games sooner, maybe he's more inclined to make that switch to Mason Rudolph. So that's kind of where my head's at with this particular question. If left up to me, I say just, hey, either Levis gets there or this team bottoms out, but you ride him until the end. That's what she said.
Well said there. Well spoken, Stoney. I would tend to agree, because whether or not, I get the whole idea of fans specifically wanting to see a Titans team that has been so miserable over the last 2 years succeed. And the quickest way to that success is through Mason Rudolph. And I get it. And I get that there are some questionably intelligent people on sports talk radio talking about why Mason Rudolph should be there now. But I think like you said, we've seen little baby steps of progress in Will Levis. Even if it is just a baby step, we've seen that. And I just don't know if Mason Rudolph were to take over, if we're going to see the flashes in Mason Rudolph be able to use guys like Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins in this offense effectively. Yeah. And like you said last night, like I said last night, you look at the run game, especially, which was better, but Tony Pollard, 22 carries for 88 yards with a long of 41. Taking that out, that's what? Quick math real quick. That's 23 carries for 47 yards. Like, that I don't know about you. That doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence in me in the running game. Then Tyjae Spears, 15 carries for 39 yards. Like, there are still things that when this team is limited to just running the ball or a certain aspect of it, like they were last night with Mason Rudolph, it's still not being that effective. And so they get the win, but myself, I think we're all in agreement here. It sounds like that the Will Levis experiment should and will go on, assuming that he is good to go for the game after the bye, because the Titans do go on bye here. But I think we can move on to maybe some other things, some other bright spots with this team. I was going to say,
if I may, Chef Rand commented, Mason has no long-term value to this franchise. Be real. They signed him to a 1-year deal, so he literally does not have long-term value for this franchise.
And I will say, Hurricane Lou here in the comments, which is a discussion for another day, says it's difficult to say without knowing Amy Adams Strunk's guidance in private. We don't know what the conversations are there in terms of what she is thinking, and we've learned over the past couple of years things can change very rapidly with her thinking. We don't know where her head's at with this team right now, but I can tell you where Rand Carthen's head is right now, and that's with developing a lot of these young guys past that he drafted this year. And I think this game we got to see a lot of really good rookie performances, and we'll get back to T'Vondre Sweat, who had himself a game even without Jeffrey Simmons, who also we learned today that elbow is not just dinged up. It is he said earlier today to reporters, it is a Tommy John like injury. Ooh. So that is the UCL. Obviously not the same thing as baseball, because I don't see, unless, I mean, you know what it does get rid of? It gets rid of any opportunity for Jeffrey Simmons to throw a touchdown pass this year.
Yes. Yes.
But it doesn't really limit his ability to rush the passer, so to say. Obviously, that's something that is going to be very painful for him to play through for the rest of the season. But he said he had he's pretty confident that resting it over the bye and getting to week 6, he should be back. But even if he isn't, T'Vondre Sweat last night kind of showed us that he can be the real deal. And even double teams be damned, T'Vondre Sweat was getting after the running backs and the quarterback last night.
I mean, there was a play, JT, where he literally had one hand on a guard, one hand on a tackle, and was still just driving them back. I'm like, this is, I mean, it wasn't like quick enough to get into the pocket and affect the quarterback, but I'm still like, he's winning this double team with one hand on each guy. I thought he was fantastic against the run. I thought he was fantastic in pursuit at the boundary as well. The speed is scary for a man of his size and stature. Is incredible for him to flow to the outside. He looked like a linebacker running to the outside, penetrating, getting in, getting to the tackle, and just collapsing on top of guys. I mean, I don't know how you watch this guy and say anything other than just dominant last night. It was incredible. We saw some flashes of the hands. I've talked a lot about how good his hands are. I felt like people kind of underrated that, but he was great at swiping them, lifting them, getting them out of the way, getting into the offensive lineman's chest. They tried like stretching him a little bit and running more zone plays, and he just, like, they couldn't move him. He's just in a gap, and there's nothing that they could do about it. It was really, really phenomenal stuff that I think you have to be a little relieved, because the 2 previous weeks he had kind of cooled off from that Chicago game. But this looks like a measure of consistency, kind of adding back to balance the other 2 games out. And where he's at this point in the season is just, it's good stuff, man. 4 games into his NFL career, and we're talking about the guy just absolutely dominating that Dolphins offensive line last night.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about his snap share as well. 42 snaps last night in that game, kind of putting the people who were doubting T'Vondre Sweat's ability to play a full game kind of to shame last night, as he continues to get better and better every week. TJ in the comments here saying Meatloaf was feasting, and then Ed Henry saying it was therapeutic to be on the other side of Aaron Brewer. Because not only did T'Vondre Sweat get in there, Sebastian Joseph Day also had himself a game as well, which was good to see. And then the other rookie I wanted to talk about and briefly touch on, I would say, is Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who in the moment where, with Chidobe Awuzie out for this game,
man.
Jarvis Brownlee Jr. shows up big in this game, taking down guys like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Stoney, what did you see from Jarvis Brownlee Jr. in this game?
It was as advertised, and it's the one thing I've said repeatedly with Jarvis Brownlee Jr. The things you see on the tape at Louisville, they showed up at the Senior Bowl, and then they showed up in training camp, the preseason. Now they're showing up in games. This is a feisty, aggressive player. He was hitting everybody in sight. There were times that I'm watching the broadcast back late at night, and I'm having to rewind because I'm like, okay, when did Jarvis Brownlee just appear in the backfield? Like, I missed that. I just blinked, and all of a sudden he's in the backfield. He's setting the edge. In coverage, I thought he was fantastic. He allowed 3 catches on 5 targets for just 9 yards. That's according to my buddy Zach Lyons, who sent me that text at like midnight last night after he got off the radio, and I was still up writing my column for the game. Fantastic stuff. There's a play where he ends up in space at the edge, one-on-one with Tyreek Hill, and you're watching it and you're just thinking, oh shit, he's about to get cooked, but he doesn't panic. He just stays disciplined and forces him out of bounds. There's no panic in the guy. He's aggressive. He's feisty. Man, he really looks like he could develop into a nice piece for this defense.
Yeah, and he's going to have to continue to be a big piece, as they will be without Chidobe Awuzie for the next 4 games at least. Here's what Brian Callahan had to say on Jarvis Brownlee Jr.'s first start in his rookie season.
He showed well for himself. That was a really good game by Jarvis. Played scrappy, played confident, played physical. For a rookie to come in and do that against those players, I mean, Waddle and Tyreek are really good players, and that's a tough assignment to be out there on those guys. And I thought he answered the bell, and it was cool for him to go do it at home. You know, he's from down there, and there's a little bit extra motivation for that. A lot of people watching him from his hometown. But yeah, I was impressed with Jarvis. I thought he really rebounded from what was kind of a shaky off the bench performance against Green Bay, and really locked in and played well for us. And to have 4 corners that you can count on to come play. Now that with Cheeto out and Jarvis being that 4th guy in there, to be able to come play at the level he did last night was really encouraging.
Chef Ran here in the comments saying what we've all said since the beginning of the draft cycle. He calls Brownlee Baby Sneed, and that's kind of the physicality that Jarvis Brownlee Jr. does play with. And in that comment, I do wonder, do you think that when he talks about the 4 corners that he can really rely on, do you think he was including Trey Avery's call up last night in said one? Or do you think it was Darrell Baker? Oh, no. You think it's Trey Avery? The Trey Avery show is back on? Oh, okay.
No, I think he was probably including Cheeto in that conversation. It was probably
even hurt.
Even hurt. Yeah. Oh, Darrell Baker Jr. made a couple plays last night, though. I had to rewind the broadcast. Like, wait, who is? Oh, yeah, I forgot they added him. So
James Lynch also showing up big. Guys off the practice squads. This team continues to find players like that. Stoney, before we wrap up, anything out of your notebook in particular that you wanted to bring up? I know the offensive line looked a lot better than it did in weeks past, although as Brian Callahan said today, still not exactly where he wants them to be, and notes that he probably never will say exactly when they get to the place they want to be with it, because it's always you can always get better week after week. Yeah. But any notes on the offensive line or any other guys that stood out for you this week?
I thought Radunz played well. I think he is really growing into the position at right guard. J.C. Latham is a superstar in the making. I thought Peter Skoronski had a decent game. Haven't watched the tape back from the end zone angle, so I don't have a firm opinion on a lot of those guys. I just jotted down one note that just said Radunz pulling and pounding, and I'll leave it at that. I won't say the nickname I gave him on the air, but
no, his family though, maybe one of his relatives said that you ate with that comment. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is a good one.
It was his sister. Yeah, I I want to mention Amani Hooker too. He's the only name in my notebook that we haven't talked about, kind of squaring up on Tyreek Hill in the end zone. I thought he had a great game, getting to the boundary. We mentioned with Quandre Diggs, the way they tried to bounce Tyreek Hill outside. Quandre Diggs was there, but also Amani Hooker had a couple of plays where he really got to the spot aggressively, took the right angle, forced him out of bounds, or made the tackle. I thought on Friday, I said, hey, if your linebackers are going to play aggressive, if you're going to play up to this Dolphins, your safeties are going to have to come up and fill the area that's vacated. I think they did that and then some. The last thing I want to ask, and this is probably going to make some Titans fans turn into the Joker when I ask this, but we're talking about the darkest timeline at the quarterback position. And I know there's some discussion about Malik Willis in the comments. And I can't help but think, I had this thought. I'm sitting in my office last night and I'm watching Mason Rudolph do his thing. I'm writing my article. It's close to 1 o'clock in the morning. My cat's like at the door, like, can we please go to bed now? This is crazy. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, man, if Will Levis isn't the guy, and this upcoming quarterback draft class does not look that great, and if Sam Darnold is your best free agent option, he's playing his way into a big contract, you decide Will Levis isn't the guy. Wouldn't it be really nice to have a young developmental quarterback on the roster that you've seen make some progress throughout his career in the NFL that maybe you could turn to and see what he's got next year? I don't know. I'm just asking. We watched the preseason and a lot of us were saying, like, I don't know how you cut Malik Willis after this. They got to keep 3 quarterbacks, and then they don't make that decision. And now look what he's doing in Green Bay. It's just, like I said, I want to turn part of this fan base into the Joker, just contemplating that what Malik Willis could have been with another year.
Wow. No words for an interesting thought. Maybe Shrike, are you talking about maybe Josh Dobbs as that developmental quarterback?
Yes,
maybe?
Josh
Okay.
Dobbs.
Yes. Okay. Anything else that you wanted to add besides that? Otherwise, I think that's going to do it for our reactions here to the Titans' first win of the season. I know
Nick
right
Folk.
before the show, Nick Folk. Yes, I will at the end of it here. I couldn't help myself. I made a meme yesterday of like a cow just being drained to its bones, and the farmer being like, "Good morning, sunshine," and I just titled it "Titans Offense to Nick Folk" because the old man was absolutely cooking last night, and I don't know if I don't think we'll get another opportunity to see Nick Folk lead the charge to get to 30 points this year. I think it's going to have to come from somebody else. But I will say, it's good for Brian Callahan and this team to get that kind of ease a little bit of the pressure off of this team and go into the bye week, as they said. I don't know what we're going to do on Friday's show because there's no more content the rest of the week. They're all off. They're enjoying their bye week, but maybe we'll have to find something fun to do.
Let's go to Dave and Buster's and play skee ball and shit.
Oh, I would be so there for that. Titans talk and skee ball.
Yeah,
man, it sounds like a good time. I don't know if people would be interested or not, but I certainly would be interested in that. But I don't know. We'll have to see. But that's going to do it, I think, for the Hot Read podcast today. I'm going to go watch the New York Mets, who apparently are already losing 2-0 in the top of the second. So cool. Once again, got to thank Sinkers Beverages for getting me through the next 3 days of my life as the Mets play in the playoffs here. They drive so you can drink. Also have to give a shout out to Bluegrass Beverages in Henderson for sponsoring the show. And until whatever we do on Friday, this has been the Hot Read podcast. We'll see you later.